I'm Melina, and until my 30th birthday, the highlight of my life was when the accounting firm I worked for switched from PC to Mac. Not exactly groundbreaking, but it was a big deal in my world. Then, at a friend's birthday party, everything changed. That night, I found myself in a cramped living room, clutching a soda and feeling self-conscious in my too tight dress. The music was blaring, way too loud for conversation, but just right for Mark. He was a head taller than most, which might explain why he spotted me. With a confident stride that made my heart race, he approached. "Hey, you're Melina, right?" His voice cut through the thumping bass. Yeah. And you are?" I asked, taking a sip of my drink in an attempt to steady my nerves. "Mark, I've seen you around. Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just stood beside me. "Not at all," I replied, my voice barely audible over the music. "So, Melina, what brings you here tonight?" he asked, leaning in. His tone was casual, but his gaze was intense. "Just here to celebrate Sarah's birthday," I said. "I've known her for a while. Went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things, and I can't say no." Mark chuckled. "I get it. I work with her. She's hard to say no to." "An accountant, right?" I asked. "Yep," he nodded. "Numbers are my game." I joked that it's thrilling. I said, "But spreadsheets aren't exactly the most exciting thing in the world." "Sounds like a wild ride," Mark grinned. I wasn't sure if he was teasing or genuinely amused. "Absolutely," I laughed. "It's all high stakes and parties in the accounting world." We laughed together, and for the first time in a while, I felt a genuine connection with someone who seemed truly interested in what I had to say. It was both exhilarating and a little intimidating. "Want to get some fresh air?" Mark suggested, tilting his head toward the backyard. I nodded, relieved to escape the noise. The cool air was refreshing. "So, what's a guy like you doing at a party like this?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just looking for a good time, and maybe someone interesting to talk to," he replied, his smile making his eyes crinkle. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books, and his passion for graphic design, even though he was stuck in a corporate job he didn't love. It felt as if we had known each other for years. As the night came to a close, Mark pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again." I hesitated, unaccustomed to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. "Sure," I said, entering my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. "Great, I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us." "Sounds good," I managed, my stomach doing flips. As he walked away, I felt a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 30 wasn't so bad after all. Perhaps it was just the beginning of something truly wonderful. The days that followed Mark's call were a blur. Before I knew it, I was preparing for our first date. Nervous as ever, I opted for a simple blue dress, hoping it would do the trick. Mark arrived at 7 sharp in a clean, well-kept setting. It wasn't flashy, but it suited him perfectly. As I got in, he flashed a smile that made me feel like I was floating. "You look great," he said. "Thanks," I mumbled, probably as red as a tomato. "You look nice too." Dinner was at a cozy little Italian restaurant he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was a bundle of nerves. We ordered pasta, he with some fancy sauce and me with plain marinara. "So, Melina," he said, twirling his spaghetti onto his fork, "tell me something about you that no one else knows." I chuckled, playing with my food. "Well, I'm pretty boring, but not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That's impressive. You'll have to show me sometime." "Sure," I said, starting to relax a little. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "The best you'll ever have." "I'll take your word for it," I said with a smile. "Maybe you can prove it sometime." I found myself effortlessly teasing, and as the conversation flowed, I felt more grounded than I had in a long time. It was as if I was exactly where I was meant to be. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Mark and I saw each other constantly. He'd come over after work, and I'd join him for lunch near his office. He introduced me to his favorite hidden gems around town, charming spots I had never noticed before. It was like rediscovering the city through new eyes. Things took a serious turn when Mark invited me to— "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. Mark, clearly pleased, replied, "Thanks, Mom. She's lovely, isn't she?" We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was lively. Jack passed the potatoes and asked, "So, Melina, Mark tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting." "It has its moments," I replied with a smile. "It's mostly numbers, but I enjoy the order and structure of it." "And how's your family?" Mary asked with genuine interest. "They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman. Always busy, but he's been really supportive of me." The evening felt like a blur of warmth and acceptance. Everything seemed to be falling into place as if my entire life had been leading up to this moment. Mark made me feel seen for who I truly was, beyond just being the accountant. A few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights shimmered on the water, creating a picturesque scene. Mark stopped and turned to face me, his expression serious. "Melina, I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady. "Yeah?" I asked, my heart starting to race. I didn't want to wait any longer. "I know this is fast, but will you marry me?" In that instant, my world shifted. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just the pure certainty of my response. "Yes, Mark, I'll marry you." The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Mark to my father. My dad took an immediate liking to Mark, appreciating his straightforward manner and clear affection for me. "He's a good man, Melina," Dad said, offering his approval. It meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest ceremony, nothing extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving how I looked in my wedding dress, something I had never imagined. I beamed with happiness as I shared photos of the day on social media, spreading our joy to friends and family. Life, however, didn't slow down after the wedding. If anything, it picked up speed. Mark and I barely had time to enjoy our newlywed bliss before he brought up a big idea. "Hey, Melina, I've been thinking," he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our small apartment. "How about we move in with my folks?" I froze, coffee mug in hand. "Move in with your parents?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if we were around to help out. Plus, it'd save us some money on rent." It made sense financially, but the idea of moving in with the in-laws felt like something out of a sitcom. "Are you sure they'd want us there all the time?" "Absolutely," he assured me. "Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good." So 2 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a jumble of boxes. Mark's mom, Mary, was already waving from the porch before we had even gotten out of the car. "Oh, Melina, we're so thrilled to have you both here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Jack, Mark's dad, clapped him on the back. "Welcome home, son, and you too, Melina." The house was cozy, filled with furniture that seemed to have come straight out of a 1970s catalog. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I couldn't shake the feeling of missing our cozy little apartment. Mark, sensing my hesitation, whispered, "It's going to be great, you'll see," as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Mary was constantly hovering, popping into our room with questions about whether we needed anything. "Just making sure you're comfortable," she'd chirp, while I did my best to ignore the invasion of our privacy. One evening, we all gathered for dinner. Mark, me, Jack, and Mary. The conversation was painfully mundane until Mark casually dropped a bombshell. "So, the house needs some major repairs," he said between bites of meatloaf. I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. "Repairs?" "Yeah, the roof's in bad shape and the plumbing is from the dark ages," he explained, with Jack nodding solemnly in agreement. Mark continued, avoiding my gaze. "We were thinking maybe we could all chip in for the costs." I glanced at Mary, who suddenly found her plate incredibly fascinating. "All of us?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Just got a pay cut at work," Mark muttered, "so I'm a bit strapped at the moment." There it was. I wanted to voice my frustration but managed to say, "I'll see what I can do." Mary's eyes welled up with tears. "Oh, Melina, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel." The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and forced smiles through gritted teeth as Mary praised the improvements. Jack clapped me on the back and said, "You're really part of the family now, Melina." Part of the family, sure, the part that pays for everything. One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of costly decisions, I collapsed onto our bed, exhausted. Mark came in and sat beside me. "Thanks for handling all this, Melina," he said, his tone almost sincere. "It's fine," I lied, staring at the ceiling. Just didn't realize it would be this much. He squeezed my hand. It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right? Our future, I echoed, feeling uncertain about whose future we were actually building as I lay there, listening to Mark's steady breathing. I couldn't shake the nagging doubt about whether moving in was the right decision, but there was no turning back now. I was in this deep and I had to see it through, no matter the cost. After the renovations, the house looked fantastic, like something out of a magazine. Despite the financial strain, I felt a pang of pride as I took in the view. To celebrate, we decided to host a small dinner party for just the four of us. That's when things took an unexpected turn. As we enjoyed dinner, laughing and sharing stories, Mary suddenly fell silent. The atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming heavy. She glanced at Jack, then at us, her eyes welling with tears. "We need to tell you both something important," she said, her voice trembling. Mark and I exchanged concerned looks. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Jack took a deep breath. "The house, it's heavily mortgaged. We owe $200,000. And if we don't settle the debt in 2 months, the bank could take it away." My fork dropped onto my plate. "You mean all the repairs we just paid for?" Mary began to sob uncontrollably. We were ashamed and thought we could manage it, but after the repairs and everything, there's just no way. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. All the money, all the effort, and it was for a house that wasn't even secure. "So what are you saying now?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Well," Mark began, avoiding my gaze, "I was hoping maybe, Melina, you could talk to your father." "Are you serious?" I snapped. "Ask my dad for $200,000. After all his help, the house would be secure for us, for our future," Mark pleaded. Mary's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this bizarre drama. "Please, Melina, it's our home. We've spent decades here," Mary said through her tears. Despite my fury, the tears and pleas wore me down. "I'll think about it," I muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad, hesitantly explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but with one condition. "I'll provide the money, Melina, but only with a formal agreement. I want everything documented." When I told Mark about my dad's conditions, he was far from pleased. "Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us?" he complained. "Mark, it's $200,000. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious," I countered, feeling the rift between us widen. "He'll get his paperwork," Mark muttered, clearly irritated. The paperwork was completed, and the money was transferred. Mary and Jack were visibly relieved, constantly expressing their gratitude. Yet the warmth in our relationship had shifted. A coldness now hung between Mark and me that hadn't been there before. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, tragedy struck with brutal suddenness. My Aunt Judith's voice trembled over the phone. "Melina, it's your Aunt Judith. Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad." My heart sank. "What? How is he?" "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "No, that can't be right," I mumbled, numb with shock. I hung up and turned to find Mark standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "My dad, he's gone," I managed to say before I crumbled into sobs. Mark came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like a stranger's embrace. "I'm sorry, Melina," he said, and while his tone seemed sincere, I was too engulfed in my grief to truly register his words. After another exhausting day of funeral planning and dealing with the agency, I returned home earlier than usual. I'd expected silence, but as I inserted my key into the front door, I overheard voices from the living room. It was Mark, his tone laced with frustration and contempt. "I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. She's just, it's too much," Mark complained. His mom, usually so kind and understanding, responded in a stern whisper, "You have to hold on a bit longer. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts. Your father-in-law has them. Melina has them now. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them. Then I'll start fresh with that rich beauty I told you about," Mark said, his voice cold and calculated. The words hit me like a slap. The man I thought I knew was revealing a side I hadn't seen before. A chill raced down my spine. I was mourning my father while the people I lived with were conspiring behind my back. The family I had thought I married into turned out to be nothing more than a group seeking to exploit me for their own financial gain. Rage mingled with shock, but I knew I had to stay composed. I slammed the door loudly as if I had just arrived, deliberately interrupting their scheming. "Oh, Melina, you're back early," Mary said, her voice shifting instantly to a tone of faux concern. Her eyes widened with a hint of feigned innocence. "How did everything go with the funeral plans?" I forced a smile, feeling my stomach churn. "It's all coming together. Thanks for asking." As I spoke, I noticed the quick glances they exchanged, their faces plastered with insincere concern. It made my skin crawl to see their true colors, but I knew that revealing my knowledge now wouldn't help. I needed to stay smart, protect what was mine, and maybe even seek some justice for their deceit. The funeral had been a heavy, somber affair, filled with grief and whispered condolences. But as we returned to Mark's parents' house, the true nature of the family I had married into began to reveal itself. Gathered in the living room, sipping lukewarm coffee, Mark's demeanor shifted dramatically. His usual charm vanished, replaced by something colder. With a harsh laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped a bombshell. "Melina, pack your things. You need to get out. I got someone else now. Someone better." His words should have struck me like a slap, but I forced myself to appear stunned. Before I could respond, Mary added with a snide giggle, "We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money." "What about the house?" I asked, struggling to maintain a facade of innocence. "The house that I paid to fix with $200,000. Mary laughed harder, as if I had just told the funniest joke of the year. "Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here." Mark's smirk widened. "And those receipts you're so proud of? We found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone." I let them think they had the upper hand, but I couldn't hold back my laughter. My reaction puzzled them, their smiles faltering in confusion. "What's so funny?" Mark demanded, his voice edged with irritation. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed were copies. The real ones are safely with my lawyer." The color drained from their faces. Mark's arrogance gave way to panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. "I can and I will," I said it firmly. "I want my money back, every last cent, or my next call will be to the police." Mark and Jack exchanged glances, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Jack, usually bold and brash, began to plead. "Melina, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out." With the truth laid bare and leverage firmly in my grasp, negotiations with Mark and his parents dragged on longer than I anticipated. They tried every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I remained resolute. "Look, it's simple," I stated firmly during one of our lengthy discussions at what was now legally my kitchen table. "The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the $200,000. That's the deal. No more games." Eventually, they relented. We agreed to make everything official and legal. I insisted on documenting everything through a lawyer, leaving no room for further deceit. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched each signature closely, ensuring every detail was precise. Once finalized, I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Mark's mother. Despite her deflated demeanor, she still carried a trace of her former hauteur. "I'll keep these in a safe place," I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder, "just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any more stunts." With the legalities settled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Mark was silent, his previous arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A chapter had closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house, watching Mark and his parents carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow and the mood was somber. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I had imagined my marriage ending, but given the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. Once everything settled and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word reached me through friends about Mark's predicament. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him shortly after our divorce, and his parents were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a stark downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. Karma had caught up with them faster than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, likely hoping to worm their way back into my life or at least my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. Cutting those final ties was liberating. One afternoon, as I enjoyed a quiet moment with a book in my living room, there was a knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Mark standing there, a pathetic figure holding a wilted bouquet of flowers. The vivacity of it made me scoff. I opened the door and laughed outright at the sight of him. Really, Mark? Flowers? He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet wilting along with his spirits. Melina, I've realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong. I leaned against the doorframe, not bothering to hide my amusement at his discomfort. What changed, Mark? Run out of options. He looked down, shame clear on his face. I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right. I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. Almost. You're not here to make things right, Mark. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore. Not for you. His face fell, and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. Melina, please. I cut him off sharply. I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done. Forever. Mark stood there for a moment longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Returning to my book, I smiled to myself. The quiet of the house wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the chaos that once reigned here. I was finally at peace, living life on my own terms, and no bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could disrupt that. I was truly finally free. /